I've recently watched all of the videos from the Masked Arab's channel, and boy is Islam a messed up religion, if you accept all the hadiths. From condoning child rape, to violence on an Old Testament level, to sex with animals, to Muhammad conveniently getting a revelation commanding him to marry or have sex with a particular woman he likes, even if it would contradict what he said before, many of the hadiths make Islam a terrible, violent religion. However, the hadiths were a collection of oral reports from people around Muhammad and commentary on how the Quran should be interpreted in terms of the law. Because of this, many reformist and moderate Muslims have rejected many of the hadiths as completely going against the Quran. If you just look at the Quran, assuming we reject everything about the hadiths, how does it compare to the Bible? Shall we have a religion-off? War atrocities. In many of the hadiths, there are many tortures that occur in the name of Allah, cutting off hands and feet, putting out eyes and leaving them to die in the desert, sieging a city and making them starve before slaughtering them, war brides and selling of non-Muslim slaves, rape. However, the Quran is just a call to arms and commands to fight and doesn't tell any stories about slaughters from what I can tell so far. There are claims that one should fight those who insult Allah, though there are many ways that can be culturally interpreted. However, sex with war brides is still totally cool. The Bible. There are just as many tortures in the Old Testament, complete genocide of entire cultures under the claims that they were sinful, partial genocide of cultures taking virgin girls as war brides, which the Old Testament clearly states you can take as a wife and force yourself on her so long as she has 30 days to mourn her now dead parents you just killed. Deuteronomy 21, 10-13. But that was the Old Testament, you say. Question: did Jesus ever condemn these acts or view them as horrible? Nope, just gave out some new commands to his followers as no harm, no foul, but said that none of the old law would pass away until heaven and earth passes away, and all is fulfilled, which to a Christian should mean in the New Jerusalem. The disciples were to act passively to those in power, unless it came to policing their own. Ananias and Sapphira in Acts is a story about people who died just for lying, one where the punishment didn't at all fit the crime. Slavery. The Bible. I'm starting off with this one first, as the Quran mirrors the Bible pretty much, except for a few exceptions. One, it's okay to beat your slaves even if they die. You wouldn't be punished, just as long as they survive a day or two after the beating. Exodus 21, 20-21. But avoid excessive damage to their eyes or teeth. Otherwise, you have to set them free. Exodus 21, 26-27. Jubilee happens every 50 years, where every Jewish man is freed, but it says nothing about wives or non-Jews. Leviticus 25, 8-13. The Quran. In the Quran, much of the zakat or tithe of Muslims go to pay for the freedom of slaves. Freeing a slave can also expunge the sins of a master. Slaves are to be treated well and not cruelly, and slave and master were considered equals in the eyes of Allah. It seems that slavery, while allowed natural, was a bit of an upgrade from the Bible, and certainly pre-Islamic slavery, unless you were a woman of course, for which there was no change and aside from wives were considered one of the two classes of women not commanded to protect their genitals. Treatment of women. The Quran. In Surah 24:31, men are told to look away from evil and protect their private parts. Women, in the very next verse, are told to do the exact same things, but to hide their adornments as well. However, every translation is different. Ghali makes it sound like women are just to cover their breasts. Shakir says head covering and breasts. And the Sahih International Quran translates it as narrowing the vision of the eyes, aka the burqa, even though all the others translate that section of lowering the eyes exactly the same way they do for men. Women are to only show their adornments to men in their family, husband, father-in-law, or other women and children, and men without sexual desire. I'm guessing eunuchs. Surah 2:28. Women have rights similar to those of men over them in kindness. Men have a degree above them. Men are in charge of women because Allah has made the one of them to excel the other, and because they spend of their property for the support of women. So good women are obedient, guarding in secret that which Allah has guarded. As for those of whom ye fear rebellion, admonish them and banish them to beds apart and scourge them. Surah 4:176. Unto the males is the equivalent of the share of two females. The Bible. Other than the trade of women in the Old Testament, polygamy is as common as the Quran. Exodus 21, 2-4. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and the 7th he shall go free for nothing. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons and daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. A slave owner was permitted to give a woman to his male slave as a wife. There is no indication that women were consulted during this type of transaction. Also, serving 6 years, he would leave, but his wife and children would remain slaves of the slave owner. Exodus 21:7. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as menservant do. A father could sell his daughter as a slave, even though a male slave is automatically given his freedom after 6 years. A female slave remained a slave forever. A daughter's virginity was worth a lot of money to a father. Exodus 22:16-17 are about property restitution of the case of a man who seduces a virgin. It was the King James Version that turned this into basically talking about a rapist marrying a rape victim. This was viewed only as a property offense against the woman's father. The woman was expected to marry the seducer. If her father refused to transfer ownership of his daughter to the seducer, the latter was required to pay money to her father. The money would be compensation for the damages to the father's property, his daughter. It would be difficult for a non-virgin to marry. Leviticus 27:6 shows that boys are worth more than girls. How about the New Testament? Jesus says little about the role of women, but speaks openly with them. But Paul, on the other hand, says, 1 Corinthians 14:34-36, let your women keep silent in churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak. But they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shame for women to speak in church. Ephesians 5:20-24, wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. And he is the Savior of the body. Therefore the church is subject unto Christ. So let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Final score. Both books are incredibly misogynistic in general. Jesus does some nice things to make things better, but never condemns the stuff done or commanded in the Old Testament. Muhammad, PB&J, does do some good things like required charity, some advancements in slavery laws, and updates some of the inheritance laws, but does not actually preach much difference from what is in the Old Testament. He never went against the Old Testament, but he very much went against the teachings of Jesus, which was fine because he considered Jesus just another prophet. Jesus was a reformer and taught a new way of thinking in peace. If I had to choose to follow one as a humanist, I would of course pick Jesus, but only if I could ditch and ignore both the writings of Paul and of the Old Testament, which would negate the need for Jesus to die, making Jesus little different from the Buddha or Lao Tzu really in his divine status. As for the Quran being a book of peace or not, and whether you can tell if a Muslim is violent just from their book, that's not really helpful. Look at Judaism. Their book is in many ways much worse, with given examples of genocide and violence. Yet other than the Orthodox in Israel pushing the government to allow them to take land from native Palestinians, Judaism for the most part is a really peaceful religion in spite of their incredibly violent and horrific book. It's their extra-doctrinal teachings that you need to look at to see if they're a violent religion, and how they interpret their scriptures. It is really, really easy if you're a religious person to look at the violence in your ancient book and justify it as just being that place and time, and hold a truly humanitarian view of the world in this day and age. Many of the hadiths are horrible, as the Masked Arab points out in his videos, condoning child and adult rape, torture, genocide, and sex with animals. If they are Muslims who follow these tenets, yes, that is absolutely terrifying, and we need to worry about these people. But something I've learned from my video series on the Quran is that Muslims can't seem to agree on anything, and I've been told I need to learn Arabic, try 10 different recommended translations, try only academic Western translations, and this was from an actual Muslim, or watch videos by noted Muslim scholars, or I won't get the real message of the Quran. It's no different from Christianity in its variations and beliefs, and interpretations, and to lump all Muslims into one category, or violence and horribleness based on the actions of specific groups, is the same as lumping atheists in with Stalin and Mao. I will still disagree with all Muslims on religion, and be opposed to them based on their promotion of faith without evidence, but I'll not fear or insult them needlessly by attacking their beliefs with strawman views of other Muslims. Just like with Christians, one has to find out what the person or group actually believes to have a debate, or you'll just be talking past each other and sounding like a completely ignorant asshole.